Hey guys, today I'm out here in Southern California with the newest member of the Chevy Bolt electric car family, the new Bolt EUV. Chevy is calling this sort of an electric crossover. This is the bigger brother to the regular Bolt. It's about 6 inches longer, has more legroom in the back, but about the same kind of cargo room. Most importantly, however, it is still front-wheel drive. It's not an all-wheel drive electric crossover. The front end is definitely similar to the regular Bolt, but there are certainly some styling changes as well. So we have the headlights and the turn signals up here that are not connected to one another like we find in the regular Bolt, the non-EUV model. We still have a very small little grille right down there. Electric vehicles still need cooling, but that's all the cooling that they really require. You can reference the size chart down at the bottom of your screen so you can see how this compares with the competition. In a nutshell, the regular Bolt is about the size of the Hyundai Kona. This is about the same size as the Kia Niro. Those are two direct competitors in the less expensive small EV segment in North America right now. This is about 20 inches shorter than the Ford Mustang Mach-E, so it's really not a direct competitor to that Ford. That's bigger, it's heavier, it's going to be more powerful than this. It's also going to be all-wheel drive. According to Chevy, no sheet metal is shared between the Bolt EUV and the Bolt. That makes sense because of the proportions and just the different scales that we find in this sort of crossover styled model. One interesting touch is that the parking lights are up here in these modules, but the brake lights and turn signals are actually down here at the bottom of the bumper, and then the backup lamp is right there in the middle. Be sure to let me know what you think about the styling of the Bolt and the Bolt EUV down there in the comment section below. I certainly think this looks better than the first generation Bolt. The Bolt and the Bolt EUV share the same electric motor. It produces 201 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque. Power is sent to the front wheels only via a single-speed reduction gear set. The battery pack is also common between the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. It's a 65 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. Charging happens behind door number 1 over there on the driver's side, and the big change for 2022 is that the onboard charger is now an 11 kilowatt unit, so if you have access to an AC charger, a level 2 charger that supports that, you can definitely gain range considerably faster than in last year's Bolt. The one thing that hasn't changed for 2022 is the DC fast charge speed. It's still rated at 55 kilowatts. That means that whether you plug this into a 50 kilowatt CCS charge station or a 350 kilowatt DC charge station, you're not going to notice an enormous charge speed difference. However, thanks to the efficiency of the Bolt and the Bolt EUV, both models will gain about 100 miles of range in 30 minutes of charging. On the subject of charging, if you act fast, you will get a level 2 charge station installed in your home with the purchase of a Bolt EUV. Chevy says this offer is available only till June, so you do need to get your hands on one of these pretty soon. At this point, I should apologize in advance because the rest of this video is going to be a little bit funky. I have only had 2 hours with the Bolt EUV, and most of it was spent driving. So I have a lot of B-roll that I was able to shoot down here in Southern California, but not a lot of time to park and bark about the car. So apologies for that. Let's just roll right into it. Although I haven't had much time to spend with the Bolt, most of it has been spent driving, and that's probably what most of you want to hear about. Bottom line, the Bolt EUV drives very much like the previous generation Bolt, although I think I prefer the way this suspension is tuned just a little bit over the previous model. Although the Bolt is still heavier than the average gasoline vehicle that you might want to be cross-shopping with this, it's not as heavy as a Tesla or the Ford Mustang Mach-E. And that means that we don't get that same sort of firm and bouncy ride that we find in modern Teslas or in that Ford, which is built very much like a Tesla, to be perfectly honest. Instead, the Bolt EUV drives basically like every other small crossover or small hatchback out there. So this is substantially similar to something like a Nissan Kicks. And according to Chevy, that's exactly the target demographic for the Bolt EUV. Someone that's interested in one of those subcompact crossovers, doesn't need all-wheel drive, but would like to drive something with a slightly elevated driving position, the styling of a small crossover, and the utility of a hatchback. Due to the limited amount of time I've had with the Bolt EUV down here in Southern California, I haven't been able to 0 to 60 test this or 60 to 0 test it. I also haven't been able to drive this out on any really fun winding roads or anything like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop the scores for the previous generation Bolt up there at the top of the screen. Bear in mind, of course, that's for the Bolt, not the Bolt EUV. And of course, this is a little bit heavier, it's a little bit longer. So expect this model to take just a little longer to go from 0 to 60 and also stop a little bit longer from 60 miles an hour back to 0. But the difference is probably not going to be enormous. As far as electric vehicles go, remember that the Bolt is relatively inexpensive. This starts just over $30,000, so this is significantly less expensive than some of those newer, long-range, bigger EVs that we're seeing coming on the market. However, General Motors at the moment does not have the full EV tax credit. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, so definitely keep that in mind. If the full tax credit doesn't apply to you, then it's a non-issue for any of the EVs that might be out there. But if you do qualify for the full $7,500 federal tax credit, it could be a big deal when comparing this against really any of the manufacturers out there other than Tesla. One of the first things I noticed hopping inside the Bolt is that the driver's seat and the front passenger seat are considerably more comfortable for my body shape than the previous generation. The previous generation seats really seemed to be designed for someone with a very slight frame, and my frame is just a little bit bigger than that, so I felt that those seats were constantly digging into my back in kind of an unusual place. I don't find that at all in this generation Bolt or the Bolt EUV. I was able to sit in the regular Bolt as well. They have basically the same seat design. This is going to be a lot more comfortable if you have broader shoulders or if you're just a larger person. The driver's seat in the Bolt is also a little bit more adjustable, interestingly enough, than the more expensive Mustang Mach-E. The seat bottom cushion adjusts for tilt and for height, and we don't see that in the Ford. Tilt and height are actually linked with one another. They don't adjust independently in that model, although we don't have a power passenger seat in this car. On the other hand, the driver and front passenger seats are both heated and ventilated, which is something that we don't see in that Mustang, or honestly in very many EVs out there. That's always been something that surprised me, because it's much more efficient to ventilate your rear end than to cool the entire cabin. So heated and ventilated seats are not just a comfort feature, they're also an energy saving feature. The other thing you'll notice immediately is that the styling of this interior is more premium than the previous generation Bolt, and the parts are also more premium. We have more soft touch materials going on the dashboard and on the doors, some perforated inserts on the dashboard which really dress things up a little bit. As you'd expect out of a modern Chevy, the infotainment system supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and aside from the EV-specific screens, which definitely are a little bit more detailed than some of the discount EVs that we see out there, the rest of the software is pretty similar to the Buick Envision that you recently saw on the channel. Also surprisingly similar to the Buick Envision are the new climate controls below the infotainment system with toggle controls, which definitely make it a little bit easier to tell exactly what you're doing. I like the toggle controls for the heated and ventilated seats and for the temperature controls especially. Below that, we have a Qi wireless charging mat. This vehicle supports wireless Apple CarPlay, but you can also plug in via a USB cable, which is what I prefer to do with my phone. So unlike some vehicles out there where you cannot choose wireless or wired, this will give you that choice. Then we have the buttons for the sport mode in the vehicle, sport mode on and off toggle, stability and traction control, lane keeping assistance, and then the new push and toggle shifter that we're seeing working its way across GM's lineup. What's interesting about these toggles is that the entire what looks like a drive button does not pull up like we see in Honda and Acura models. Instead, it's really just the little chrome rim up front. Behind the shifter is the button for the one-pedal driving mode. Now, personally, I prefer not using one-pedal driving. I would rather just control the brake pedal manually. This vehicle does have blended braking, so using the brake pedal will not necessarily engage friction brakes unless friction brakes are required for the braking event that you're commanding. That's different than we find in modern Teslas, which do not use blended braking, but very similar to other EVs. Speaking of braking, I love the fact that the Bolt and the Bolt EUV have this regen brake paddle on the back of the steering wheel. That's something that for some reason we don't find in too many electric vehicles, but it's one feature that I wish every EV out there had. Below that, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system, which is available in the Bolt EUV only for some reason, not in the regular Bolt. And it operates very similarly to Super Cruise that we found in the Cadillac CT6. As you can see, I'm driving hands-free. Behind the steering wheel, we have the facial monitoring system right there. That's making sure that I'm paying attention to the road. And then we have the LED on the steering wheel. It's telling us the status of the Super Cruise system. Green means that the vehicle is doing the steering for you. This is the only hands-off-the-wheel steering system available currently in the US market that's not in the beta program. I have to throw some caveats in there because Tesla, of course, has the quote-unquote full self-driving program, but that software is still technically in beta. They're not calling that a full public release. This is a vehicle that you can theoretically buy and just do this yourself out on your longer road trip. Now, speaking of those longer road trips, one of the things that Chevy has not changed about the Bolt EUV is the charge speed. So this still will max out at 52 to 55 kilowatts, they say. Theoretically, that is just over the limit of a 50 kilowatt CCS fast charger, but this is not going to charge nearly as quickly as some of those other new EVs out on the market. In a way, that makes road tripping with the Bolt EUV a little bit less likely than with some of those longer range or faster charging EVs, but this is going to be an awful lot less drama-filled because you don't even have to touch the steering wheel. Now, speaking of Super Cruise, this is the previous generation Super Cruise system, the one that we found in the previous generation Cadillac CT6. Not, interestingly enough, the new one that we see in the Cadillac Escalade. Apparently that's all because of cost. The Cadillac Escalade has an array of short-range radar sensors all the way around the vehicle. That's what it uses for the lane change functionality. So this system will not change lanes for you. It will just stay in this lane as long as the Super Cruise route is mapped. So unlike some competitive lane centering systems, Super Cruise, that's doing all the steering for you, will not work on a route that General Motors has not approved for you. And it also seems that the lane interactions are not as smooth as the lane interactions in the new Cadillac Escalade. That likely is because this is the previous generation of the Super Cruise system. According to GM, we should see some variants of this and some variants of the newer system in the Escalade in those 22 to 25 models that GM says will get Super Cruise over the next few years. You can see that this system does tend to wander around the lane just a little bit, but it's certainly much more aggressive at lane centering than any of the other lane keeping assistance systems out there. And again, this is the only one that is truly hands-free. Now, if you want an electric vehicle with a hands-free system to compete with this, that's going to be available theoretically second quarter or third quarter of this year in the Mustang Mach-E. The rest of the steering wheel is pretty similar to other GM models. We have the volume controls and track forward-backward buttons on the back of the steering wheel. Personally, I find that a fine place to put them. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. And then the buttons and the scroll wheel on the right side of the steering wheel control the multifunction instrument cluster behind the steering wheel. I'm going to go ahead and take control now because we have to start merging over, and this is where the regen paddle on the back of the steering wheel is kind of handy. This doesn't adjust the regen in multiple levels like we see in Hyundai and Kia EVs. That's probably my favorite setup, but pulling on the toggle does give you more complete regen. So if you're going downhill and you want to just tap the brakes basically a little bit, slow your speed down, you can just pull on the toggle and it will do that for you. I like the fact that GM is giving us a number of different ways of controlling this drivetrain. So you're not just stuck with one. You're not just stuck with one pedal driving. You also have the little paddle back here, or of course you can put your foot on the brake pedal. But back to the instrument cluster for a moment. The instrument cluster is essentially the same one that we found in the previous generation Bolt. I was a little bit surprised that the software didn't change more drastically. The screen's about the same size, and although there are probably some software tweaks in there, it looks largely like the previous generation instrument cluster. As far as handling feel goes, the Bolt feels pretty competitive to most of the mainstream front-wheel drive EVs out there, so this isn't going to have the same sort of driving dynamics that we find in some of the competition, but it's going to be very similar to similarly priced EVs. And I think that really is the key thing to remember about the Bolt and the Bolt EUV, is that these are relatively inexpensive electric cars. Well, there are clearly going to be electric cars out there that will out-accelerate and out-handle and brake shorter than the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. Remember that most of them are going to be more expensive as well. As far as cabin noise goes, the EUV is a little bit quieter than I remember the last Bolt being, and it's especially quiet when it comes to wind noise. Wind noise is something that some EVs have troubles with, including some of the newer crop of alternative EVs out there, but the Bolt is pretty aerodynamic, and they've really done a good job of hushing the wind noise in here. Now, as you'd expect in an inexpensive vehicle, when you're out on rougher pavement, road noise is a little bit more pronounced in the cabin than in some of the more expensive options, but again, remember the price tag. Now, why might you want the Bolt EUV over the regular Bolt? On the spec sheet, this is 6 inches longer, but it has the same kind of cargo area in the back. You probably would want the Bolt EUV if you want the more upright styling, the more crossover-like looks, and more legroom in the rear seats. This gets about 3 inches more legroom than the previous generation Bolt, and that really is noticeable if you sit behind me with the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. There is definitely a significant amount of legroom back there. Finally enough that if you wanted to put a rear-facing child seat back there behind an adult that's about 6 foot, 6'1", that is going to be possible in the Bolt, and it wasn't possible before. One thing that surprised me is that even though the roof height in the EUV is a little bit higher than the regular Bolt, we don't actually find more rear seat headroom. And that means that for me at 6 feet tall, sitting upright in the rear seat, my head is touching the ceiling. Also bear in mind that the Bolt is a relatively narrow vehicle. This is a subcompact crossover, or subcompact hatch, whatever you want to call the Bolt and Bolt EUV. So bear in mind that the cabin is going to be narrower than something like a RAV4 or a CR-V or a Chevy Equinox. And that's definitely going to be noticeable if you want to put 3 people across the back, or you want to combine adults or teenagers and child seats back there. It's a little bit difficult to talk about range and efficiency since I haven't had that much time behind the wheel of the Bolt, but I suspect this is going to be pretty similar to the last generation model, which actually was one of the more efficient EVs you can get in America. That's one of the ways that Chevy gets to the long, about 250-mile range in both of these vehicles in real-world driving, while having a battery pack that is considerably smaller to the one that we find in, for instance, the Ford Mustang Mach-E in its extended range version. Another area where the Bolt and Bolt EUV are pretty similar is the cargo area in the back. Interestingly enough, the cargo area in the Bolt EUV, primarily due to styling, is actually just a hair smaller than the one that we find in the regular Bolt. So where did the extra 3 inches go? According to Chevy, it's mainly the styling, the front bumper, the back bumper, and the way that the vehicle was changed in order to make it look a little bit more like a crossover. That consumed some inches. 3 inches go to the back seat, 3 inches go to styling. Nothing happens really back there in the cargo area. The cargo area is pretty deep, and it could certainly accommodate 4 22-inch roller bags, the largest size you can carry onto a domestic flight. One thing to note is that even though the rear seats fold flat, they don't fold flat with the cargo area in the rear. I wish that GM would do something along the lines of the magic seat arrangement that we find in some Honda products, where the seat bottom cushion could have folded into the footwell. That would allow those rear seats to fold a little bit flatter and be a little bit more cargo practical. Going back to efficiency for a moment, the other thing that GM has not changed is that the Bolt does not have a heat pump. Now that's not too surprising because of the low price tag of the Bolt and the Bolt EUV, but it does mean that if you're in a colder climate, heating the cabin is going to consume a bit more energy than we find in some of the competition that has heat pumps available. That said, however, we do have the heated seats up front and heated seats in the rear, a feature that for some reason we also don't find in all new EVs. Continuing our look around the cabin, we have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, height adjustable headrests as well, and you can see that these seats offer perforations because the seats are both heated and ventilated in this particular trim. They also have a more premium look than we found in the previous Bolt. Above the seats we have a panoramic moonroof. It extends to just over the driver and rear passengers' heads. I can open it up here so you can see that right behind me, but it doesn't go all the way back there to the rear passenger area. So this moonroof appears to be a little bit smaller than the one that we find, for instance, in the Kia Soul. Keep in mind the Kia Soul EV is not coming to the US market. That could have been a direct competitor to this, but Kia decided not to bring it here. I should mention that this panoramic roof has a fabric shade that is powered and it completely blocks out the light. That is something that I really appreciate. So many new EVs out there just have an enormous sheet of glass up there, and in hotter climates like down here in Los Angeles, that really just makes me feel like I'm in a solar oven. Back out here in the parking lot, how much is the Bolt going to set you back? Well, it's going to start at $31,995. That's not for this model, that's for the regular Bolt, the one that's a little bit shorter. So if you're looking to save some cash and you don't need the rear seat room that we find in the EUV, that's going to be your best option. Bear in mind that at the time that I'm shooting this, there is no $7,500 tax credit applicable to the Bolt or the Bolt EUV. That's because General Motors has already sold over 200,000 things with plugs that qualified for the tax credit, so their tax credit has sunsetted. Now, I don't know whether that's going to change in 2021. There are rumors that it might get resurrected, but at this point in time, there's no federal tax credit applicable to the Bolt or the Bolt EUV. Speaking of the EUV, this is going to be more expensive, as you might imagine, $33,995 starting for this model, but it is again going to come with that level 2 charger installed in your home standard. Speaking of the EUV, this is obviously going to be more expensive, $2,000 more expensive to be specific, starting just under $34,000, but at least for the moment, for the first 6 months of 2021, this is going to come with a level 2 home charge station bundled with the car and the installation of that charge station. So that actually is a pretty good deal. Now, how does this compare to the competition? Well, the Nissan Leaf starts at $31,670, but DC fast charging is optional in that Leaf. The Leaf also does not have an active cooled battery like we find in the Chevy Bolt. That's really been one of the things to keep in mind about General Motors' full-on EVs and their plug-in hybrids of the past, is that GM is really obsessed with battery lifetime and battery temperature control. So whether we're talking about the first generation Bolts or the first generation Chevy Volt, their plug-in hybrid, we simply have not seen the same kind of battery lifetime concerns that we have seen in the passively cooled Nissan Leaf. So if you're concerned about that at all, that's one reason why you might want to get this outside of any applicable tax credits over there on the Nissan side. You're also going to find more standard equipment in the Bolt EUV than the absolute base version of the Leaf. But the Leaf is a slightly bigger vehicle. It's about 10 inches longer than the Bolt EUV right here. Then we have the Hyundai Kona. We don't have any detailed pricing information on it just yet because it also got a recent refresh. It actually got a front-end look that's not too dissimilar to what we see here in the Bolt EUV. Now, it does qualify for the full federal tax credit, and the last model started around $37,390. So definitely more expensive than this, but it had the tax credit, so it may end up being about the same price as this model. We then have the upcoming Kia Niro. 2022 is going to bring us a new model of that one, expected to start between $39,000 and $40,000. So again, more expensive than the Bolt, but again, it will have the federal tax credit. Then we have the Volkswagen ID4 at $39,995, again with the tax credit, but more expensive than this if you don't qualify for it. Which vehicle is right for you will really depend on your priorities. Are you looking for something that's small and easy to park, also on the efficient side of the small EV segment? Or are you looking for something with a bit more oomph, that has a bit more room on the inside, and you're willing to have a bigger vehicle and have a less efficient vehicle? Although at this point in time, we don't know what General Motors incentives will be like on the Chevy Bolt, but you can logically expect that towards the end of the year, especially if there is no federal tax credit that has suddenly been reapplied to the Bolt, that we will see greater incentives on this than on some of the competition. The Bolt is also available everywhere in the United States, and not everybody's EV is available in every state. That means that if you're living in Middle America and you're looking to put an electric car in your garage, you're going to have fewer options than you might in New York or California. But on the other hand, the Bolt and the Bolt EUV are both up against some pretty stiff competition for 2021 and 2022. We have a host of new electric vehicles coming out from pretty much every manufacturer, and all of them are really aggressive at chasing not just the target demographic for the Chevy Bolt, but also chasing Tesla with perhaps lower price tags. But again, price tag is definitely something important to keep in mind. If you're looking for one of the inexpensive EVs on the market, that is definitely going to be the Bolt. And that's logically why Bolt sales have continued to be pretty healthy. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you choose if you were shopping for an inexpensive EV? Price tag here would be $35,000 and below, I think is really where the Bolt shines. Now, if you want Super Cruise, that's going to be $43,495 in the Bolt, and at that point, that is an awful lot closer to some of those other EV options out there. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned because I will be able to get my hands on one of these for a regular full review, running this through all the usual detailed pricing and comparison section just as soon as I possibly can. I'll see all of you later.